They say Russia is a land of extremes, of burning hope and brutal winters, of rulers draped in gold and peasants buried in mud. But more than anything, Russia is a story. A long, bloody, beautiful story of a people who were torn, tested, and tempered like steel. And it all began not with a czar or a general, but with a question. A question shouted into the cold wind over 1,000 years ago: who will lead us? It was the year 862, and the land was restless. The Slavic tribes of Eastern Europe were caught in endless feuds, unable to unite or defend themselves. In desperation, they turned outward. They sent an invitation to a group of Viking warriors known as the Varangians. Among them was a man named Rurik, who answered their call. With his brothers, he sailed down from the north and established control over Novgorod. He brought order, justice, and strength, and with that, he planted the first seed of what would become the Russian state. Rurik's legacy would stretch far beyond his lifetime. His descendants would go on to build the mighty Kievan Rus, a federation of Slavic and Finnic peoples centered in Kiev. Under the rule of his successor, Oleg of Novgorod, Kievan Rus expanded its borders and political influence. Oleg even launched a daring campaign against Constantinople and nailed his shield to its gates. It was more than a military victory. It was a symbol that Rus had arrived on the world stage. Trade flourished. The people prospered. But something deeper was still missing: a soul. That would come with Prince Vladimir the Great. Vladimir wasn't always noble. In fact, he was known for his brutality and pagan ways. But in 988, he made a decision that would define Russia's spiritual path for centuries. Inspired by emissaries from various faiths, he converted to Orthodox Christianity and ordered the mass baptism of his people in the Dnieper River. The act was not just religious, it was political and cultural. It tethered Rus to the Byzantine Empire, bringing art, architecture, and literacy. The golden domes began to rise, and with them, a new identity. But nothing lasts forever. As the princes of Rus multiplied, so did their rivalries. The once unified state fractured into warring principalities. This weakness would prove catastrophic when a new terror emerged from the east. In the early 13th century, the Mongols descended like a storm. Led by Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, the Golden Horde burned cities to ash and slaughtered entire populations. Kiev was nearly leveled. For the next 2 centuries, Russian princes would kneel to the Mongol Khans, paying tribute and submitting to their rule. It was called the Mongol yoke, a time of humiliation and fear. But amid the suffering, something else happened. A spark. The Principality of Moscow began to rise. At first, Moscow's princes served the Mongols loyally. They collected taxes and expanded their influence. But slowly, they began to consolidate power. In 1380, a defining moment arrived. Prince Dmitry Donskoy of Moscow led a coalition of Russian forces against the Mongols at the Battle of Kalikovo. Though not a decisive military victory, it was a spiritual one. For the first time, Russians stood together and fought back. That spirit would eventually lead to liberation. In 1480, under Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, Russia finally threw off the Mongol yoke. Ivan refused to pay tribute, and when the Mongols advanced, he stood firm at the Ugra River. The standoff ended without a battle, but it marked the end of Mongol rule. Ivan claimed the title, Tsar, and began calling his realm, Third Rome, declaring Moscow the rightful heir of the Roman and Byzantine legacies. Ivan's grandson would push the boundaries of power even further. Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible, was crowned the first official Tsar of Russia in 1547. His early years were marked by reform. He modernized laws, created a standing army, and expanded the empire into Kazan and Siberia. But tragedy and paranoia transformed him. After the death of his wife Anastasia, he descended into tyranny. He created the Oprichnina, a brutal secret police force that carried out purges and public executions. He even killed his own son in a fit of rage. His reign left scars on the nation's soul, but also set the precedent for absolute autocracy. Following his death, Russia fell into chaos. The time of troubles, a period of famine, civil war, and foreign invasion, nearly tore the country apart. Impostors claimed the throne. The Polish army occupied Moscow. But from the darkness rose a miracle. In 1612, a butcher named Kuzma Minin and a prince named Dmitry Pozharsky united the people. Together, they led a volunteer army to liberate Moscow. In 1613, the Romanov dynasty was born with the election of Michael Romanov as Tsar. The Romanovs would rule for over 300 years. Under their reign, Russia grew from a fractured kingdom into a sprawling empire. Tsars like Peter the Great modernized the nation through sheer force of will. Peter traveled to Europe, studied shipbuilding, and returned to drag Russia into the modern age. He built a navy from scratch, reformed the army, and constructed a new capital, St. Petersburg, on the marshy banks of the Neva River. Thousands died building it, but Peter called it his window to the west. He declared war on the old ways and transformed the country with fire and iron. Catherine the Great followed in his footsteps. A German-born empress who seized power in a coup, she was a woman of intellect, charm, and ambition. She corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers, expanded Russia's borders through war and diplomacy, and fostered culture and education. But beneath the glittering court, the lives of ordinary Russians remained brutal. The vast majority were serfs, peasants legally bound to their landowners. Their suffering would simmer for generations. As the 19th century dawned, Russia became a global power. It defeated Napoleon, played a key role in European politics, and expanded deep into Central Asia and the Far East. But the contradictions of empire were stark. While Tsars ruled with divine authority, revolutionaries whispered in the shadows. Tsar Alexander II attempted reform, freeing the serfs in 1861, but his changes came too slowly and were poorly implemented. In 1881, he was assassinated by radicals who wanted more. His son, Alexander III, reversed the reforms and imposed strict autocracy. Then came Nicholas II, a well-meaning but weak ruler who inherited a restless empire. By the early 1900s, Russia was boiling over. Rapid industrialization had created a new urban working class, while peasants still lived in desperate poverty. The war with Japan in 1905 ended in humiliation, and when peaceful protesters marched to the Winter Palace to petition the Tsar, they were gunned down. Bloody Sunday shattered the illusion of the benevolent Father Tsar. Nicholas made concessions, including the creation of the Duma, a parliament, but it held little power. Revolutionary movements grew stronger. Marxists, anarchists, and liberals all vied for change. Then came the First World War, a disaster for Russia. Millions died. The economy collapsed. The army mutinied. And in March 1917, the people rose. Strikes, protests, and soldier revolts forced Nicholas to abdicate. The Romanovs fell. A provisional government was formed, but it was fragile and unpopular. Amid this chaos, a man named Vladimir Lenin returned from exile. He brought with him a simple promise: peace, land, and bread. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, overthrew the provisional government. The Russian Revolution was complete. The Tsar and his family were executed. The world watched in shock as the empire of the Romanovs became the Soviet Union. But revolution brought civil war. The Reds, Bolsheviks, fought the Whites, a loose coalition of monarchists, nationalists, and foreign powers. The war raged for years, claiming millions of lives. Famine, disease, and executions became the new normal. But the Bolsheviks emerged victorious. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was officially born. A new chapter had begun. Back in the present, a teacher named Elena stood before her classroom in modern Russia, retelling this sweeping story to a group of wide-eyed students. Her voice trembled with passion, not for the glory of Tsars or the slogans of revolution, but for the ordinary people who had endured every chapter. The farmers who froze in the fields of Siberia, the mothers who sent sons to war, the writers who found truth in poetry when truth was forbidden. Russia, she said softly, has always been more than its rulers. It's a land of survivors, of builders, of dreamers. Every time it falls, it rises again, stronger, wiser, and more determined. That's our inheritance. That's our story. And that story, from Rurik to revolution, still echoes in every snow-covered street and every Russian heart.